Most people live their lives caught in an endless cycle of distraction and comparison. They wake up, they grab their phone, and before their feet even hit the ground, their minds are already consumed with what everyone else is doing. Who is more successful? Who is in better shape? Who is traveling? Who's happier? And this constant fixation on the external world bleeds them of their energy. It drains their focus. And it leaves them hollow because all of their attention is directed outward instead of inward. You cannot build a strong self when you're re-addicted to the illusion of other people's lives. The truth is that distraction and comparison are perhaps the most effective weapons society has to keep you average. Because as long as your eyes are glued to someone else's progress, you won't notice your own potential rotting from neglect. You have a finite reservoir of energy each day. And the question is, where does it go? Into scrolling endlessly? Into obsessing over how you measure up to someone else's highlight reel? Or does it go into your own development, into cultivating your strength, your skills, your character? You cannot serve two masters. Either you serve your distractions or you serve your growth. Psychologically, this is rooted in what we might call the tyranny of external validation. Human beings are deeply social creatures. Our nervous system is wired to care about hierarchy, about where we stand in relation to others. And that's not inherently bad. Without comparison, you have no model for improvement. You wouldn't know who to admire or what to aim at. But here's the problem when comparison becomes the lens through which you see everything. It stops being a tool and turns into a prison. You no longer inspired by the success of others, you enslaved by it. And envy slowly corrodes your soul. If you want to shock the world, the first radical act is to stop handing your focus over to distractions and stop defining yourself by comparison. Pull your energy back, because the energy you waste looking outward could be the very fuel you need to build something extraordinary inwardly. Think of it this way. If you could gather up every ounce of attention you waste in a single day, you'd have more than enough power to reinvent your life. The tragedy is that most people never do. They leak that energy minute by minute, day by day, until years pass and they wonder why they haven't changed. There's a deep philosophical principle here. Focus is not simply a practical matter, it's existential. What you pay attention to literally defines your reality. If you pay attention to chaos, you become chaotic. If you pay attention to resentment, you become bitter. And if you pay attention to the curated illusions of other people's lives, you become a hollow echo of them rather than an authentic version of yourself. You have to decide, will you live as an imitation or will you live as an original? Because you cannot be both. And the thing about distraction is that it masquerades as harmless. Scrolling, watching, consuming, it doesn't feel destructive in the moment, but that's exactly why it's dangerous. It's like a slow poison that numbs your ambition. It convinces you that observing life is the same as living it, but it's not. Watching someone else succeed does not make you succeed. Admiring someone else's discipline does not give you discipline. The only way to carve out a meaningful existence is to redirect your attention back to the only thing you can actually control, yourself. Now, let me be clear. This isn't here about isolation. It's not about cutting yourself off from the world. It's about hierarchy of focus. You need to build yourself first, anchor yourself in strength, and only then engage with the external world in a way that's not corrosive but productive. When your attention is grounded, you can look outward with clarity rather than envy. You can admire without resenting. You can learn without losing yourself. But you cannot do that if your foundation is weak. So the practical question becomes, how do you withdraw from distraction and comparison? You start with small but radical acts of discipline. You stop beginning your day with a flood of external noise. You set boundaries around your attention. The art of silence, the art of You practice the art of silence, the art of solitude, the art of being with your own thoughts. You pick one thing each day that you want to master, however small, and you pour your focus into it with full intensity. And slowly, day by day, you reclaim the most valuable resource you have, your attention. People will not understand this at first. They will expect you to be as distracted as they are, as obsessed with appearances as they are. But when you stop playing that game, something remarkable happens. You start to build depth in a shallow world. You start to cultivate strength in a culture obsessed with weakness. And eventually, without announcing it, without advertising it, people begin to notice, because the withdrawal of your energy from distraction into self-mastery does, just change what you do. It changes who you are. And that is shocking. In a world where everyone is chasing attention, the person who no longer needs it becomes powerful. In a culture where everyone is consumed by comparison, the individual who focuses inward becomes untouchable. That's just the paradox. By refusing to obsess over others, you eventually become the person others obsess over. So here is the challenge: audit your focus every day. Ask yourself, audit your focus every day. Ask yourself, where is my attention going? Is it feeding me? Is it feeding me, or is it draining me? If you cannot answer that honestly, you will remain a servant to distraction. But if you can, and if you begin to redirect your energy toward yourself, you will shock people, not because you set out to shock them, but because you set out to grow. And the growth of a human being who has mastered their focus is one of the rarest, most astonishing sights in this world. Stop bleeding energy outward. Focus on yourself, and when the time comes, let the results speak for you. When people talk about success, they often imagine the big visible moments, the recognition, the applause, the praise. They picture the promotion, the achievement, the grand unveiling of their work. But what they fail to understand is that those moments are only the surface. They are the tip of an iceberg. What lies beneath, what nobody sees, is discipline. And discipline is not glamorous. It's not loud. It's just the thousands of invisible choices you make in silence, long before anyone notices you exist. The most shocking transformations are built in secret. They are born in the quiet moments when you choose to rise an hour earlier than comfort demands, or when you decide to keep working after the urge to quit has already screamed its case. They are forged when you resist the temptation of short-term pleasure for the sake of long-term strength. Nobody applauds you in those moments. Nobody is watching. But that is precisely the point. The real battle is always internal, always hidden. There's a psychological reality here that cannot be ignored. Human beings are wired for immediate reward. Our brains light up when pleasure is quick and recognition is instant. And yet, the most meaningful growth requires the opposite. It requires the discipline to delay gratification, to tolerate the discomfort of being unseen, and to trust that the compounding effect of small, invisible acts will eventually reshape you. That's a brutal trade-off because it means sacrificing the fleeting dopamine of being noticed today for the enduring strength of being undeniable tomorrow. Think about it. A person who trains in silence, who studies when others are distracted, who builds habits without the need for validation, what happens when they finally step into the light? They shock everyone because the world only sees the outcome. They don't see the hidden hours, the sacrifices, the repeated acts of discipline. They only see the finished product. That's just why it is so powerful. It's unexpected. It seems sudden, but it isn't. It's the result of months, even years of invisible effort. And this is why so few people ever experience true transformation, because they are addicted to being seen working rather than actually working. They want to broadcast the grind before they've endured it. They want to be celebrated for discipline they haven't yet cultivated. But you can fake it. Discipline is one of those things you can outsource, and you can cheat. You can post about waking up early, but if you hit snooze tomorrow, the truth eventually comes out. You can talk endlessly about goals, but without silent discipline, they remain nothing but words. Philosophically, discipline is a confrontation with chaos. Life is inherently disordered, unpredictable, full of temptations and distractions. Discipline is the act of imposing order on yourself before the world imposes its disorder on you. It is self-government in the truest sense. And if you cannot govern yourself in the dark, you will be ruled by external forces in the light. That's not just weakness, it's slavery. But here is the paradox. Discipline feels like restriction in the moment, yet it is actually the highest form of freedom. Because when you have trained yourself to act regardless of mood, you are no longer a slave to mood. When you have built routines that hold you steady, you are no longer tossed around by chaos. That's when you become dangerous, because now your progress is no longer dependent on fleeting motivation or on the applause of others. You can move forward steadily, even when no one cares, even when it is hard, even when the world is against you. And the irony is that the more silent your discipline, the louder your results. People want to understand how you moved from who you were to who you may become. They will assume it was luck or talent or some sudden stroke of fortune, but it wasn't he. It was all those mornings, all those late nights, all those moments of quiet perseverance that nobody else witnessed. That's why it shocks them, because the transformation looks sudden when in reality it was painstakingly gradual. So what does this mean in practice? It means you must learn to cherish the invisible hours, to fall in love with the process when nobody notices, to take pride in the days you keep your word to yourself, even if not a single soul applauds. You build character not when you read being watched, but when you alone and you still choose to act with integrity. That is where the foundation of greatness is laid, out of sight, underground, like the roots of a tree. And the deeper the roots, the stronger the tree when the storm comes. Imagine how rare that makes you in today's world. Most people cannot tolerate being unseen. They re-addicted to validation like it oxygen. But if you can discipline yourself to endure the silence, to work without the constant drip of recognition, you place yourself in a category so small, so rare, that when your results finally emerge, they cannot be ignored. And let me tell you, that is the true shock. Not the noise of your words, not the performance of your ambition, but the undeniable evidence of a disciplined life that suddenly appears for all to see. That is when people step back, stunned, and wonder how you became what you are. And the answer will always be the same. You did it in silence when no one was watching. So if you want to shock everyone, start by shocking yourself. Prove to yourself that you can build discipline in the dark when nobody else clapping, when nobody cares. Because once you've done that, the results will take care of themselves. And when they finally surface, they'll be louder than anything you could ever say. Discipline in silence creates results that echo louder than applause. Every single person in this room has suffered. Some of you carry the weight of personal loss, others the sting of betrayal, failure, or rejection. And if you haven't yet been struck down by something devastating, you will. That's not pessimism. That's its reality. Life is suffering. It has always been suffering. But here is the distinction that separates those who rise from those who collapse. Suffering, when left unmanaged, will destroy you. But suffering, when faced directly, can become the very substance out of which you build your strength. The common assumption is that struggle is a sign of weakness, as if the presence of hardship proves you re-failing. But that is an illusion. Struggle is the ground on which character is forged. When you feel broken, when everything in you wants to give up, that is precisely the place where transformation is possible. Because in that crucible of difficulty, you have two options. Either you let pain consume you, or you learn to consume the pain and use it as fuel. Psychologically, this comes down to meaning. Human beings cannot endure suffering without meaning. If you suffer without understanding why, it crushes you. But if you can assign meaning to your suffering, if you can see it as a process of strengthening, a kind of necessary trial, then you can endure almost anything. The weight doesn't become lighter, but you become stronger under it. Think of it this way: pain is inevitable, but what you do with it is optional. You can waste it in bitterness, or you can forge it into wisdom. You can let it break your spirit, or you can let it carve you into something formidable. And here's the hard truth: people will expect you to collapse under pressure. Society is built on averages, and the average person does collapse. When adversity strikes, they run to distraction, to substances, to excuses, to blame. They become smaller. Right? That's what's expected. Which means, if you take the opposite path, if you turn your pain into fuel, you immediately separate yourself from the crowd. You shock people, not because the suffering vanished, but because you refuse to vanish in the presence of suffering. There's a profound philosophical point here. Struggle is not the enemy. It is the teacher. Every great thinker, every towering figure of history was shaped by pain. Nietzsche, who understood suffering better than most, argued that to live is to suffer, but to survive is to find meaning in suffering. That's not just poetic, it's practical. If you believe life should be painless, every hardship feels like an injustice. But if you believe life is suffering, then hardship is not an interruption. It's just the arena in which you test yourself. Imagine a weightlifter in a gym. The weight is resistance, and resistance is painful. But without it, the muscle never grows. Life works the same way. Struggle is resistance training for your soul. And the paradox is this: the heavier the weight, the greater the strength that can be developed. If you're willing to face it, I want you to think about your own life. The betrayals, the failures, the disappointments, what have you done with them? Do you bury them? Do you let them rot inside you? Or do you treat them as raw material, as something you can forge into resilience? Because that's just the decision point. Most people bury their pain until it eats them alive. But a rare few face it directly, wrestle with it, and extract lessons from it. And those people, over time, become indestructible. The mistake is believing that shock comes from avoiding hardship, from living an easy life. No, ease makes you invisible. Hardship, faced and overcome, makes you unshakable. When people see you go through something brutal and emerge stronger, they can help but be stunned because they know deep down that they would have crumbled. And that is the shock, not that you avoided suffering, but that you transformed it. So how do you do it in practice? You start by refusing to run. The moment suffering appears, don't distract yourself, don't numb it. Sit with it, ask, what is this teaching me? What strength can I extract from this? What part of myself must die here so that a stronger part can be born? That's a terrifying set of questions, but they are necessary. Because pain is not random. It points to what must be developed in you. Loneliness points to the need for deeper integrity. Failure points to the need for greater discipline. Rejection points to the need for resilience. Pain is information, but only if you are willing to listen. And over time, this transforms you. You stop being afraid of suffering because you realize it cannot destroy you if you don't allow it to. Instead, it becomes a forge. Each trial strengthens you. Each failure refines you. Each disappointment deepens your wisdom. Until one day, people look at you and they don't just see a survivor, they see a warrior, someone forged in fire. And they re-shocked, not because you were spared from hardship, but because you refused to let hardship define you. That is that is the path. That is the way forward. Stop seeing struggle as a curse. Start seeing it as your training ground. Because if you can learn to metabolize suffering, to turn it into strength, there is no obstacle that can permanently hold you down. You turn your pain into power. Face your suffering and let it build the kind of strength that leaves the world speechless. There comes a point in this journey where words are no longer necessary. You can talk endlessly about your goals, your ambitions, your struggles, but talk itself doesn't transform anything. Words are cheap when they aren't backed by action. And the world has grown numb to declarations, to promises, to grand statements. What shocks people, what forces them to stop and pay attention, is not what you say, it's what you become. We live in a culture obsessed with appearances. Everyone wants to project an image to announce their intentions before they've done the work. People want recognition for potential, for effort, even for the idea of change. But potential is meaningless if it isn't realized. Effort is only valuable if it produces fruit. And the idea of change is worthless unless it's embodied in reality. This is why results are so powerful. They cut through noise, they can't be debated, they're not subject to opinion. They are the raw evidence of what you've done, and they speak louder than anything you could ever say. Think about it this way. If you walk into a room and declare that you redisciplined, people may nod politely. But if you walk into a room transformed, healthier, sharper, stronger, calmer, nobody needs to be told. They can see it. Your presence communicates what words cannot. Results carry a weight that words never will. They have authority, and that authority shocks people because it's undeniable. They can argue with your opinions, they can dismiss your intentions, but they cannot ignore what you have become. Psychologically, this is rooted in the principle of authenticity. Human beings are wired to detect inconsistency. We may not always articulate it, but we feel it. When someone else's words don't align with their actions, something rings false, and we lose respect for them. But when someone lives out what they claim, when their results embody their discipline, their focus, their resilience, that authenticity carries immense power. People trust it because it's real, and reality commands attention in a world built on illusions. This is why you don't need to announce your progress. You don't need to beg for recognition or force people to notice you. If you re-consistent, if you re-disciplined, if you channel your suffering into growth, the results will eventually announce themselves. You don't need to raise your voice. The life you build becomes the loudest message you could ever send. There's something deeply philosophical here as well. Results are the intersection of being and becoming. They are the evidence that you have taken responsibility for your existence, that you've moved from potential into actuality. That's not just about success, it's about integrity. To produce results is to prove that you are capable of aligning your actions with your values, your discipline with your vision. And when you do that consistently, you embody a truth that transcends mere opinion. But here sets the challenge: results take time. They don't appear overnight. That's why so many people quit. They expect immediate recognition. And when it doesn't come, they collapse back into mediocrity. But the absence of applause is not evidence that you're refailing. It's as evidence that you're still in the silent stage of growth. Seeds don't sprout the moment they replanted. They must take root underground, unseen, before they break the surface. The same is true of your results. The roots must come first. And if you're patient, if you keep working without fanfare, the breakthrough eventually becomes impossible to ignore. And when it happens, it always seems sudden to the outside world. People will look at you and say, "How did you change so quickly? Where did this come from?" They want to see the months or years of hidden work, of disciplined choices, of enduring struggle. They'll only see the results, and that's just what makes it shocking. The transformation looks abrupt, but it's not. It's the slow, consistent accumulation of invisible victories, now revealed in undeniable form. So how do you put this into practice? You resist the temptation to explain yourself. You resist the urge to advertise every step of your journey. Instead, you anchor yourself in the process. You trust that if you focus on yourself, on your discipline, on transforming your suffering into strength, the results will follow. And when they do, they'll speak more loudly than anything you could ever post, announce, or demand. The irony is that the less you chase recognition, the more recognition you eventually receive, because the world is desperate for authenticity, desperate for evidence of real transformation. When they see it, they can't help but be drawn to it. You have to force their attention. They'll give it freely, because truth has its own gravity. And your results, born of discipline and struggle, will carry that weight. So stop telling people who you are and what you're really going to do. Show them. Build yourself so completely that your results become the evidence. Let your actions carry the message. Let your life become the speech. Because in a noisy world full of empty words, the quiet force of real results is the most shocking thing of all. Let your silence build results so undeniable that the world has no choice but to listen.